What's going on, everyone? Welcome to the Noah Gillian Show. I, of course, am your host, Noah Gillian. So happy you decided to join in today. It is the 7th of September, 2023, and on today's episode, we're going to be previewing the NFL season with my divisional predictions, as well as a number of other predictions that I am sure to get 100% right. Before we get into the show, though, if you're watching us on YouTube, please hit that subscribe button, like, comment, really help the channel grow over there. It's a free way to support the podcast. Also, if you're listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, give us that 5-star review. Same thing. It's really easy. It takes a couple seconds, and it really helps the podcast grow. So definitely check that out. You can find us on Twitter, Instagram, any of that stuff with our social media handles in the description below. So without further ado, let's just jump right into it. So we have arrived. Later today, the Chiefs are going to be taking on the Lions in the inaugural game of the 2023 NFL season at Arrowhead Stadium. It's been a busy offseason, and it feels like the NFL calendar is almost 365 days a year now. And it's been a whirlwind, but it's been a lot of fun staying on top of it. And for this episode specifically, like I mentioned, we're going to go division by division, predicting how we think each of them are going to pan out, and who's going to make the playoffs and who's going to eventually lift the Lombardi. So, like I did with our fantasy football audit series, if you guys haven't seen those, definitely go check those out. I think it was really, really great coverage. Even though a lot of people's drafts are already wrapped up, I think there's a lot of good stuff we all can learn from doing that exercise. Let's do the same thing with our NFL predictions. I did my mega preview. That was episode number 1 of the Noah Gillian Show. And now we're at episode 44. So pretty cool thing there. So let's talk about last season, right? There was a lot of misses, for sure. Tons of misses. I had the Los Angeles Rams winning the NFC West and I believe winning the Super Bowl. Or at least making the Super Bowl, so way off there. However, we did have the Eagles winning the division in the East. Dallas, number 2, we did have that. Tampa Bay, although disgustingly, we did have them winning the South. On top of that, we overrated the Packers a little bit, coming off back-to-back MVPs for Aaron Rodgers. They just really struggled to get it going, and the Vikings had an unbelievable year, so they finished at 1 there. That was one of my big back and forths last offseason. Was one of my biggest debates was Vikings versus the Packers. Ended up going with the Packers, but the Vikings led the charge in that division. The AFC South got completely wrong. I had the Colts as the number 1, but I did have the Jags at number 2 ahead of the Titans. A lot of talk was around the Titans last offseason, just, continuing to build on the momentum they have built over the last couple seasons. But I was really in on the Jaguars last year, so I kind of feel good that, that ended up coming around for me. That prediction was not too bad. The AFC East, we got the top 2 teams in the Bills and the Dolphins in there, so we were pretty comfortable there. And then we had the Ravens overtaking the Bengals in the division. Probably not the smartest move, but overall, we pretty much were spot on everywhere else with the Steelers and the Browns rounding it out. So not egregious. There was a couple, like I said, in the NFC West and the AFC West were probably my absolute worst predictions. I had the Broncos and the Rams winning each of those divisions and playing each other in the Super Bowl. So I don't think you could be any more wrong than I was last year. But that's why you go back and look. I had the Packers, the Rams, the Eagles, Buccaneers, Vikings, 49ers, and Cardinals all making the playoffs last season in the NFC. And out of those, only 4 of those teams made it to the playoffs. 2 of them actually finished with bottom 5 records in the league. So love to see that. In the AFC, I had the Ravens, the Colts, the Broncos, the Bills, the Chiefs, Bengals, and the Chargers. Did a little bit better there. Had Baltimore, Buffalo, Kansas City, Cincinnati, and the Chargers. So 5 teams there, and was pretty solid there. And obviously my Super Bowl pick was atrocious with the with the Broncos over the Rams. My thinking in being that, though, with the Broncos, obviously, I've mentioned it a number of times how I was very much in on what the Broncos could do for Denver last year and what I thought they were going to be able to do for that team and Russell Wilson more specifically. And it just absolutely fell apart. Nathaniel Hackett really couldn't get a grasp on Russell Wilson and the rest of the team. They dealt with some injuries to key players. Although their defense was still stout, just their offense fell apart. Bringing in Sean Payton, expect them to be a little bit better. We'll get to them when we talk about the AFC West. But overall, the Rams just absolutely fell apart. Injuries decimated that team from the offensive line to quarterback to star wide receiver. They're starting Baker Mayfield after he gets cut, picked him up right off the street and starting him in a primetime national television game. So that should go to show you how that season went. I feel much, much better about my predictions this year. I feel like it's a little bit good. I do have a couple predictions that I feel like aren't necessarily the norm and may surprise some people. But I feel like that's why you got to do that. Every year there's teams, about half of the playoff teams in the NFL rotate. I have a lot of teams that were in the playoffs last year, but I also have a couple that are rotating their way in, and I think that's going to be a good balance. As we kind of work through this. So let's just get right into it. We're going to start in the AFC like we have done in the past, and we're going to start in the AFC North. I have the Bengals winning the division, with the Ravens in second, the Steelers in third, and the Browns in fourth. So let's get into this. The Bengals obviously are the Super Bowl representative for the AFC from a couple years ago in 2021, and all they've done over the last couple years is just continue to build up that offensive line. A big addition this year was Orlando Brown Jr. at the left tackle position. They also have just been slowly picking up players from, I don't even know if this was maybe this offseason. Regardless, their offensive line has been arguably the biggest weakness on the team over the last couple seasons, especially with Joe Burrow at the helm. And really building on that offensive line has been crucial, I believe, in the development of this team. They let Jesse Bates go, their safety, was a high money safety. I believe he signed a contract upward of $80 million with the Falcons. The Bengals rightfully prioritize a different position other than safety. I think that's a smart move. The fact that they decided to, focus on saving their money for their quarterback, their wide receivers, their offensive line, their defensive line. I think that's important, and, you'll be able to find some safeties coming around, and maybe someone potentially to play at the same level that Jesse Bates did. So I have the Bengals at number one, and it really, at the end of the day, just comes down to Joe Burrow. He is absolutely one of the very best to do it in the NFL, even in the gauntlet that is known as the AFC. I just think this team is absolutely stacked. Joe Burrow is an absolute monster. Joe Mixon is a great running back in this league, took a pay cut to come back and be a part of this team. And then, outside you have Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, and Tyler Boyd, arguably the best trio of wide receivers in the NFL. So they're going to be able to score points. I believe they're going to be able to run the ball a little bit better this year with the improved offensive line. And I think their defense is going to be good enough getting to the quarterback, especially with Trey Hendrickson, Sam Hubbard off the edge. I think they're really going to be impactful for the Bengals. And, I just need to see. I need to see someone in the AFC North put it together. It's been a few years since we've seen the Ravens do it. It's a few years since we've seen the Steelers and the Browns. So I think the Bengals are the favorite, should be the favorite, and I have them winning the AFC North this season. I have the Ravens at number 2. Last year I was all in on the Ravens, and I had them winning this division. And injuries, I think, just was a big issue for them. Lamar Jackson went down. He was, whether you want to say he was holding in or, milking injuries to to get a better contract, whatever you want to say, maybe. But at the same time, it's like he's got to protect his future. He just signed a $250 million contract. He knew that was on the horizon. So why push it and risk hurting yourself further and losing dollars on the back end? And also, he took probably more time than he needed to heal up. And I think that's an important step, especially going into an off season where you want to be ready. You want to play throughout training camp, OTAs, and all of that, the joint practices. You want to be able to play through them instead of rehabbing an injury throughout the preseason and then getting back barely before week 1. I think that's really, really going to help, especially with the turnover at their wide receiver position, including first-round wide receivers Zay Flowers, Odell Beckham Jr. signed to a big contract, Rashad Bateman now healthy off his foot injury. Obviously, they have Mark Andrews still. J.K. Dobbins is another year removed from his knee injury. So there is a lot to like from this Baltimore offense. They have a new offensive coordinator as well, a guy who likes to really push the ball down the field and pick up the pace, which has been the opposite of what Baltimore has decided to do over the last couple years. So I think it's really important that all those things are big factors. And I think they're going to do really, really well. I do have them making the playoffs. They are one of my wild card teams in the AFC. So I do have 2 teams out of the AFC North being represented here, with the Ravens at the number 2 slot in my ranks. As we move through the division, I have the Pittsburgh Steelers as the number 3 slot on the AFC North. I really wanted to include them in my playoff field because that's just how highly I view this team. But the AFC is just so deep that they just barely missed the cut. Why do I like the Steelers so much? It comes down to quarterback Kenny Pickett for me. I think that he is going to take a step this year. I think we saw it toward the back end of last year when Najee Harris finally started to get healthy. You saw this offense really start to take off. You saw George Pickens starting to come into his own. Obviously, Deontay Johnson still there, feeling very at home, feeling very, very good in the in the bless you. Feeling very good in that black and gold. So I think the Steelers are going to take another step. Like I mentioned, those 2 wide receivers are going to be absolute monsters. I think Kenny Pickett is going to take a step this year. Just looks a lot more comfortable. I don't know if the preseason is anything to really go off of. However, he has looked very, very cool, comfortable. Everyone's been very, very high praising what he's doing this off season, and then their defense is just absolutely stunning. With T.J. Watt, one of the best defensive players in the league, Minkah Fitzpatrick, one of the best safeties in the league. They go out and they get Patrick Peterson to add to their cornerback depth. And they draft Joey Porter Jr. in the 2nd round last year. So I really, really like what this team's doing. They obviously also still have Cameron Hayward on the squad. So I just think there's a lot to like. There's a lot of continuity with the team. And then again, Mike Tomlin is one of the very best coaches in the NFL. And I'm not going to bet against him getting the very best out of his team and expecting his teams to perform to their potential. So I have the Steelers at number 3. Some people, have this team, the Cleveland Browns, a lot higher than I do. And I think it just comes down to me liking the other 3 teams a little bit more. Not so much that I don't like the Browns, because there is a lot of players on the Browns that I really, really like. But no discussion of the Browns can really be had without talking about what we expect from Deshaun Watson. And what we expect from Deshaun Watson is a huge range of outcomes. Last time we saw him, he was one of probably the 5 best quarterbacks in the NFL. And the last time we saw him in a Browns uniform, he was arguably one of the worst. He was one of the worst wide receivers in the NFL. So wide receivers, quarterbacks in the NFL. But you add to the fact that Nick Chubb is an absolute monster in the backfield. I think he's going to have an absolute monster year. They have one of the best offensive lines in the league. Amari Cooper, one of the best wide receivers in terms of route running, technical ability, all of that, like Donovan Peoples-Jones, Elijah Moore. So they have some upside at the wide receiver position. So their offense should be explosive. It comes down to defense for me. Obviously, they made some improvements. They have Myles Garrett, who's just an absolute monster. We know him. They get Zadarius Smith from Minnesota to also work off the edge, so a great pickup there. Shelby Harris, defensive tackle from Seattle, they go out and they pick up. They still have Denzel Ward on the back end. They still have a lot of really, really good players and on defense. And I would love to think that the Browns are going to finish higher. Browns are going to finish higher. They have a great coach in Kevin Stefanski, but I think this is probably the toughest division, top to bottom, in the entire league. There's really not a team, we expect to be poor. I just think there's more question marks here at a more important spot with Deshaun Watson. That is the reason why I kind of am backing off a little bit from him. So I have them finishing fourth, although I do really, really like a lot of additions they made and their offense in general. I think it'll still be a good football team. I could see them finishing 7-10 and being last in the division. Honestly, could maybe even see them finishing like 8-9 and being last in the division. So I expect them to still be competitive and still be a competitive squad. Let's move on to the AFC West, and that brings us to where I made my worst call last year, the Denver Broncos. I do not have them winning the division this year. That title goes to the Kansas City Chiefs. There's just really nothing too much to say here. I don't have to go too much in depth to the Chiefs. They will be the AFC champions, at least in my mind, until proven otherwise. It just comes down to Patrick Mahomes is one of the best quarterbacks we've ever seen. Travis Kelce, arguably the greatest tight end we have ever seen. Andy Reid, arguably the greatest coach we have ever seen. And when you add all those factors together on top of an offense that is explosive at the wide receiver position, just with maybe not household names, but a number of great athletes, a good offensive line that they've been rebuilding over the last couple of years, especially right down the middle with Creed Humphrey at the center position. This team is just going to absolutely just put points on you left and right, and there's really nothing that you're going to be able to do to stop it. They get Donovan Smith at the left tackle position, Joe Tooney, left guard, Creed Humphrey obviously at the center, and then Trey Smith and Juwan Taylor on the right side. Like, these guys are just absolute monsters on the front end, and their defense is not too shabby as well. We do have something to talk about, though. Chris Jones is currently holding out from Kansas City right now. He's not going to be playing tonight. He wants a new contract. He wants a raise, and deservedly so. Is one of the best defensive tackles in the league. He's probably been the best defensive tackle in the league behind Aaron Donald for the last 5 years. And Kansas City's going to miss him. There's no doubt about that. He single-handedly wrecks opposing offensive schemes, and he's probably the third best player on that team behind Kelce and Mahomes. And so when you don't have that, you start to look at the defensive side of the ball for Kansas City, and you're a little scared almost. You have a lot of second-year guys. They had a lot of rookies last year on the back end specifically. Those guys, they went through the fire last year. They should be a little bit better coming into this year, but the defense starts and ends with Chris Jones. So I think he will be back soon. I think at some point, honestly, it could happen tonight. Detroit has a phenomenal offensive line, a great run game, a good quarterback who knows how to run that system. There's a chance that they might get pushed around on the defensive line tonight, And in that case, Chris Jones might just walk into the office like, what's going on? You want to pay me now? So I think he will be back soon. He said week 8 is the latest he'd be willing to sit out till. Even if it goes to week 8 and he comes back, he gets a couple games under his belt, and then he's full Chris Jones from like week 10 on, they're still going to be the division favorites. But that is a big question mark coming into the year. How will that defense respond? But at the end of the day, if you want to get into shootouts with Kansas City, I'll take Patrick Mahomes. Number 2, I have the Los Angeles Chargers. Number 3, I have the Denver Broncos. And number 4, I have the Las Vegas Raiders. The Raiders, real quick, I'll just kind of leave at the bottom here. I like what they have. Devontae Adams, Josh Jacobs, 2 of the best skill position players in the league. Jimmy Garoppolo is their new quarterback. I'm just not really like sold on the defensive side of the ball, although they have Max Crosby, one of the best edge rushers in the league. And again, with the NFC North, it really just comes down to liking other teams in the division a little bit more. I think Denver is going to take a step forward this year with Sean Payton in tow. He's kind of starting to check Russell Wilson and be, trying to hold him accountable, which I think is very, very important for him to reach his best self. And, if Sean Payton's not going to be able to right this ship, then they just need to tear it down and just go full rebuild from this squad, even though they paid a lot for Russell Wilson. Jerry Jeudy missing some time, Hurts, Tim Patrick missing the entire year, Hurts for their wide receiving core. Javonte Williams should be back healthy, which is a shocking development. And then the defense is obviously one of the best in the league. It was one of the best in the league last season, so I expect them to be better than they were last year and, fighting around 500. But number 2 in this division, I have the Los Angeles Chargers. I think Justin Herbert is due for a massive year. I know I said the same exact thing last year, but I truly think that this is the year. Let's just talk about last year real quick. In week 2, Justin Herbert breaks his ribs and does not miss a game, does not leave that game, and plays the rest of it in a game where he almost orchestrated a fourth quarter comeback and couldn't even breathe. Week 1, they lose their all-world tackle, Rashawn Slater, for the entire year with a torn tricep. You have Keenan Allen, who missed half the year with a hamstring injury. Mike Williams suffered an ankle sprain that forced him to miss 3-4 weeks. Austin Eckler was healthy all year, but you saw a lot of injuries on the offensive side of the ball. The defensive side of the ball, Nick Bosa suffered an injury. He was out for a majority of the season. So I just think this team vastly underperformed last year, and yet they still made the playoffs. So now, coming into this season, everybody's healthy. Everybody seems to be good to go into the season. They go out and they draft Quentin Johnston, wide receiver out of TCU, in the first round. So that just adds to the depth. I also love Josh Palmer, another receiver they have in town. So they have 4 legit wide receivers. They have some insurance behind Keenan Allen and Mike Williams if either of them if and when either of them miss time. And I really just think this comes down to Justin Herbert. If he can stay healthy, if his offensive line can stay healthy, there's a legit chance he throws for over 5,000 yards, maybe 40 touchdowns. I just think that's the talent he has, and that's the talent he has around him. So I think they're going to make the playoffs. I have them as a wild card team. And I'm not going to say they're going to... If Chris Jones really sits out for a very, very long time, the Chargers could jump out in front of the Chiefs. But even then, I think the Chiefs are going to hunt the Chargers back down and eventually end up winning the division, even if it's by a game or something. But I think it's going to be those two teams kind of fighting for the top in the AFC West. Let's move on to the AFC South now, and let's talk about the Jacksonville Jaguars, because I have them winning the division for the second straight year. Trevor Lawrence is an absolute monster. He finally has a legit wide receiver 1 in Calvin Ridley, who the Jaguars went out and traded for at the deadline last year, even though he was serving that year-long suspension. I think that's just going to allow everyone to bump. People talk about this a lot with bullpens in Major League Baseball, how when you lose your closer, everyone kind of gets thrusted into a higher leverage situation. And then when he comes back, everyone can kind of slot down into lower leverage, and they can kind of fit back into their roles. They can kind of get knocked down into somewhere where they're more comfortable. And I think that is what Calvin Ridley's going to do for this team. Christian Kirk, Zay Jones are going to kind of get put back into more of a wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3 range, whereas last year each of them were taking turns, as the wide receiver 1. Evan Ingram back in tow. I think he's finally being comfortable in his own skin in the tight end position in Jacksonville, and I think they're relying on him, and I think he's going to have another good year. Their offensive line is still gelling. It's getting better and better, especially as they remain healthy. I just think this offense is sneaky good. Like I said with Justin Herbert, I think there's an outside chance Trevor Lawrence could throw for 5,000 yards with all these weapons. Obviously, Travis Etienne in the backfield, I think they're going to have a great running game. They drafted Tank Bigsby too, so they're going to have a nice backup to Etienne as well. Doug Peterson is one of the best play callers in the league, offensive minds in general. So I just think the Jaguars have the highest upside out of any of these teams in this division, and it's really their division to lose. If there is a team that's going to compete with them for the division, I think it's the Tennessee Titans. Everybody just kind of loves to hate on this team, but Mike Vrabel is in that Mike Tomlin kind of mold where he's going to get the best out of his team. He is going to have his team hit their ceiling. And last year you kind of saw it. They started the year 7-3. They were really playing well. Then they ended up, I believe, losing like 7 games in a row or 6 games in a row or something like that. So they kind of fell off toward the end of the year, but he pretty much squeezed everything out of that roster that didn't have a wide receiver 1, that was dealing with injuries all over the place, especially to their quarterback, and that kind of made a big difference for them. So Ryan Tannehill coming into the year fully healthy, no worries about losing his job, honestly, even though they signed or they drafted Will Levis and they have Malik Willis from last year. So you add to the fact that you have Ryan Tannehill under center, you have Derrick Henry, one of the best running backs in the league, who is their offense. They go out and they sign DeAndre Hopkins to a deal and to fill that wide receiver 1 void. Treylon Burks, we expect to take a step as a second-year wide receiver. So there's a lot on their offense to like. They're gonna run, their similar offense where they're gonna run the ball and they're gonna run play action, and we're gonna see what happens. In the draft this year, they take Peter Skoronski at the left guard position. Was a first-round pick, so they went out a little bit and addressed the offensive line. They do have former Eagle Andre Dillard potentially starting at left tackle, so that's going to be an interesting kind of it's going to be an interesting dynamic there. And then we'll see. Their defense is obviously still a work in progress, although they do have some studs, Kevin Byard on the back end, Sean Murphy-Bunting in the secondary, Jeffrey Simmons at the defensive tackle position. So there definitely is a lot to like on the defensive side of the ball. I don't think they quite have the upside of Jacksonville, but they are a very well coached team. They're disciplined, they're veteran, so I think they will compete and they'll still be around. I don't think they're necessarily going to be competing for a playoff spot, but I could see them around 500 this season. And then I have the Texans at number 3 and the Colts at number 4. The differentiator here for me is I think the Texans have just stockpiled a little bit more talent over the last couple years. CJ Stroud, obviously in tow now at the quarterback position in Houston. And then they also drafted Will Anderson in the top 3 last year as well. So I think he's going to be an immediate impact player on the defensive side of the ball. They also used a first-round pick last year on Derek Stingley, who was, at the time, the number 1 cornerback in the draft last season. So I think that the defense is going to be much improved just with the talent they have. And then also DeMeco Ryans coming in as the head coach. I hope he just absolutely lets Will Anderson feast and just rush the passer. Derek Stingley, like I said, on the back end, you expect to be pretty good. Jimmy Ward, they have in their safety position. They signed from San Francisco. So, you squint and you can see some good stuff out of Houston, and I think that's the differentiator over Indianapolis. With all the drama around Jonathan Taylor, I'm just really nervous that Anthony Richardson's not really going to be in the best position to succeed his rookie year. He's going to show flashes for sure. I think a lot of people are excited at his dual threat capabilities. I just there's nobody out on that team that really scares you outside of Jonathan Taylor and then maybe Michael Pittman, but Michael Pittman hasn't really proven to be that alpha number 1 player on the outside, and really hasn't been that guy. So when you lose a guy like Jonathan Taylor, who's holding out, on the PUP, their offense becomes a lot less scary. So I do think they'll be solid. Shane Steichen, I think, is going to be a good coach for them. However, I view Houston with a little more talent, leaning into their identity a little bit more. And, they're still going to be two of the worst teams in the league. However, that's how I kind of see the back end of that division shaking out. All right, let's get to the AFC East, because this was probably the toughest division I had to do. And honestly, there's 3 teams that I could see winning this division. I literally filled in the 4th slot first and then filled out every other division, and then I came back to the East to try to figure it out. I ended up landing with the Bills at number 1, the Jets at number 2, and the Dolphins at number 3, along with the Patriots at number 4. And honestly, I could see any combination of the top 3. Some concerns I have for each team. For the Bills, the run game. They have James Cook in the backfield. Do they lean into him? Do they allow him to flourish? Do they throw the ball to him out of the backfield? You can't just throw a fastball the entire season with Josh Allen throwing the ball and expect to keep the defense off balance. You need to mix in other aspects of the game, specifically the run game, and to take some pressure off of Josh Allen. Their defensive injuries also concern me. Von Miller is going to be missing some time to start the year, which I think really hurts. He's just such a difference maker for that team. So those are a couple things why, they might not win the division. For the Jets, it really just comes down to how quickly the offense can gel. They return a lot of players on that defense, so I expect them to still be very, very good defensively. And last year, they had the Offensive Rookie of the Year and Garrett Wilson. Breece Hall was in contention for that award as well if he didn't get hurt. Side note, they probably had the top 2 players for Offensive Rookie of the Year, along with the Defensive Rookie of the Year in Sauce Gardner. So just an unbelievable draft 2 years ago for the Jets and Joe Douglas. However, Aaron Rodgers is in tow, and it really just comes down to how quickly the offensive line can gel. I think that's really been my biggest question mark because, going into last year, Aaron Rodgers was coming off back-to-back MVP years. So, 2 of the last 3 years, he's won the most valuable player in the league. I don't think he's fallen off that hard. So I think he's going to be a much, 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 much better option than they had last year. But they've talked about it all offseason, how they don't really have a set offensive line. They're waiting for guys to win positions. So it depends how quickly that gels. They're star-studded everywhere with Dalvin Cook and Breece Hall in the backfield, Garrett Wilson on the outside. They go out and they get Allen Lazard, Randall Cobb, on the outside to assist with Garrett Wilson. But the offensive line scares me. It scares me with, the Bills, frankly, as well, and the Dolphins. But so maybe I should have the Jets at number 1. And I knew when I was going to start talking about this, I was going to probably shift some thoughts around. But I do have the Jets at number 2. I have the Jets and the Bills making the playoffs. So honestly, it's probably really those 2 could be interchangeable. And then for me, the Dolphins, there's a couple things. The run game as well. Mike McDaniels loves to run the football. However, they just have a lot of injury-prone guys in the backfield. With Raheem Mostert, he's healthy right now, but has missed time in every single year of his career. Jeff Wilson's already on the IR. Mike McDaniels said he would be hopeful that he'll be back this season, so that's never good. Devon Achane, the rookie, but he's more of a satellite back in general. So they're going to need a run game. They have 2 of the best wide receivers in the league in Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle. But the fact that Tua Tagovailoa has been dealing with these injuries, he's learning how to fall. So he should, hopefully not get his head smacked against the turf, how he was last year. So if Tua stays healthy if you tell me Tua plays 16 games, yeah, the Dolphins can win this division easily. Their defensive health is also an issue. Obviously, they still have Bradley Chubb off the edge, and they went out and they signed Jalen Ramsey. Jalen Ramsey will be missing some time to start the year, so Miami may get off to a slow start. I could see them being a team that gets hot as the season goes on, as with the Jets. So honestly, I could see any of these 3 teams winning the division. I'll say the Bills are going to win the division, although I'm kind of talking myself into the Jets actually winning it. The Bills have just been so consistent over the last couple years that I really have to see it from the Jets to believe it. Although I do have them making the playoffs, so I do think they're going to take some strides this season. So I mentioned a couple times throughout it, I'll talk about my AFC playoff teams this year. So I have the Chiefs, the Bengals, the Bills, and the Jaguars, each winning their divisions. And then I have the Chargers, Ravens, and Jets as my wild card teams. The teams right outside there, Pittsburgh, Miami, Denver, Tennessee are some teams right on the outside looking in for me. So I think that's a pretty good list of what we have so far. And I actually have the Bengals representing the AFC this year in the Super Bowl. I think Joe Burrow and this team is healthy. They're motivated. And although, the AFC is an absolute gauntlet, Burrow and the Bengals have proven that they can go toe-to-toe with the Chiefs and beat them in their own stadium. So I think that's really, really important. The fact that they've proven that. The Bills just haven't proven that. You know what I mean? The Jaguars haven't proven that. The Chargers haven't proven that. The Bengals have. And there are a couple plays here and there in the Super Bowl from maybe being Super Bowl champions a couple years ago. So I have the Bengals representing the AFC this year in the Super Bowl. Let's move to the NFC now, and we'll start in the NFC North. This one, I was having a little tough decision at the top. I have the Chicago Bears at the bottom. I have the Chicago Bears in the 4 slot. I have the Minnesota Vikings in the number 3 slot in this division. And then I have the Detroit Lions winning the division with the Green Bay Packers coming in second. I'm higher on Green Bay than I feel like a majority of people, but I think that they are going to genuinely contend for a playoff spot. I do have them making the playoffs, and I have the Lions winning the division. Between the two, the defense for Detroit scares me. I'm just going to call it what it is. Their offense is very, very good. We'll get into that in a second, but their defense, it scares me. And when you look at some of the guys they have, CJ Gardner-Johnson was a big money signing from the Eagles. They were going to perform this year, and he's hurt. He's going to miss the season. They have Aiden Hutchinson, obviously, they took in the first round a couple years ago, but there's really just not like a ton of great names that you love. They did take a linebacker in the first round this year, Jack Campbell. He's not really projected to be a starter yet, but you could potentially see him working his way into there. But it really just comes down to the offense for the Lions for me. They have one of the best offensive lines in the league. They have a quarterback who is extremely consistent, who's been in this system for a few years now. And I guess this will be his third year. This will be his third year in Detroit. I think he's very, very comfortable in the system. He's a rhythm quarterback, and I think the offensive line will allow him to stay in a rhythm. They revamped their running back room with David Montgomery signing on a 3-year deal, and they drafted Jahmyr Gibbs in the first round. I think it's one of the best 1-2 punches in the league, honestly. I'm very, very excited to see Jahmyr Gibbs play. And David Montgomery, I think, is going to be very, very good as well. I would have drafted David Montgomery a lot more in fantasy leagues if I didn't have so much of Jahmyr Gibbs, because that's how confident I am in their running game being very, very good. And let's just not talk about the run game. Let's also talk about the passing game. Amon-Ra St. Brown has blossomed into one of the very best young receivers in the league. Marvin Jones Jr. is a very reliable guy on the outside. Josh Reynolds, also a very reliable guy on the outside. They could probably use one more receiver. They thought that guy was going to be Jamison Williams, but he will be serving a suspension to start the year. Also has been dealing with some injuries here and there. So, I'm not going to count on him necessarily, but he is a high upside guy who could offer a great compliment to Amon-Ra St. Brown on the outside. And I think they're going to end up winning the division. They were so close last year, but the Vikings just got extremely lucky in those one-score games, and you kind of saw that in the playoffs, how they folded. I think they're going to come back to earth drastically this season, and I think the Lions are going to do well, mainly because of their strong offensive line and the way that they're going to be able to control the game running the football. And scoring points with this potent offense. But Green Bay, honestly, I could see the Packers winning the division too. the inexperience scares me. Obviously, Jordan Love, this isn't his rookie year. Like, he didn't just get drafted. He's still going to be involved in the team. Involved in the team. He's still been involved. He's learning. He learned behind Aaron Rodgers during MVP seasons for 2 years, and then last year as well. Got some reps last year too when Aaron Rodgers missed some time. I just think now that Aaron Rodgers is gone, Jordan Love can kind of he can kind of relax and be like, listen, I'm the quarterback now. I don't have to worry about getting anybody's feelings hurt. I don't have to worry about any of that, and I can be the guy. And I'm really, really excited about Christian Watson at the wide receiver position. He did pick up a hamstring injury this week in practice, so if you guys listen, I hate the hamstring injuries for wide receivers in the preseason. It is not conducive to a healthy season overall. However, I'm really high on him. Romeo Doubs also dealing with a hamstring injury. That could alter the course of the Packers season if Doubs and Watson are struggling with injuries throughout the year. However, their running game is absolutely phenomenal. They have an unbelievable offensive line. And the continuity, I think, is a big reason why I think they're going to make the playoffs and they could potentially win the division. Matt LaFleur has been there for a number of years. He's got a lot of wins under his belt. Obviously, he had Aaron Rodgers performing at the peak of his abilities. But I really think that him being there the last couple of years, Jordan Love being there the last couple of years, A.J. Dillon, Aaron Jones, David Bakhtiari, all these guys being there the last couple of years is going to give everybody just a comfort level of we know what we need to do. And I think they're really going to lean on the run game and Aaron Jones and A.J. Dillon specifically, because those are their pretty much 2 star players on offense outside of Christian Watson at the wide receiver position. They also selected Luke Musgrave at the tight end position in the 2nd round this year. I am absolutely ecstatic to see what he can do. Normally, tight ends don't really perform fantastic in their rookie year. You could say the same thing about Sam Laporta for Detroit. Honestly, I put these 2 tight ends in a similar bucket for me. Both extremely, extremely high upside extremely high upside tight ends, young, athletic, have been targeted a lot in the preseason by their quarterbacks. So I think he could be a real issue for them, a real issue for defenses in that sense. So I'm excited to see that. And then we'll see what their defense can do. Obviously, they still are returning a lot of good players. Kenny Clark, obviously off the edge, Jair Alexander, one of the best cornerbacks in the league. Darnell Savage, free safety. Coy Walker, former first-round pick from 2 years ago. So they added to the defense a lot. Lucas Van Ness, first-round pick this year from Iowa. He's going to be an important thing. They spent 5 draft picks on potential players on defense. So it's going to be really, really interesting to see how their inexperience develops, but I think they're going to be interesting. Those 2, I think, are going to be fighting for the division. And then the Vikings, the Vikings are going to have a great offense, but their defense is going to be absolutely atrocious. They lost Za'Darius Smith, Patrick Peterson, a lot of these guys that were big veterans on their team. And they were so lucky in one-score games last year. If the ball bounces different ways here and there, they could go from whatever they were last year, 12-5, 13-4 to 8-9. I think that's very, very possible. 7-10 even. I think that both of those are within the realm of possibility. And then the Bears, I am excited to watch Justin Fields and DJ Moore on that offense. I'm excited to see their offensive line if it can start to gel. But I just think that they are a year away from being a year away. I'm going to need to see some development this year. And then, next season, if I see that, I'll be a little bit more comfortable with maybe moving them up a little bit into that discussion where we can talk about them contending for the AFC North. But as of now, I think this is a developmental year, a big year for them to see what they have in Justin Fields going into next season. Let's talk about the NFC West now, and this is probably where I have my biggest take this season. So no surprise, I have the Rams and the Cardinals at 3 and 4. I have the Rams at number 3, the Cardinals at number 4. The Cardinals might be the worst team in the league this year with their head coach Jonathan Gannon. I think the Rams should be better. The injury to Cooper Kupp sours my taste buds a little bit on the Rams offense, but Matt Stafford's healthy. The offensive line is, as of this recording, healthy. So I think they'll be okay. They'll be better than Arizona, but they'll still be the number 3 seed in the NFC West. I have the Seattle Seahawks winning the NFC West. Yes, I do. I have the San Francisco 49ers finishing second. And what it comes down to for me is just the depth of talent that Seattle has, and I just think that they're being extremely, extremely slept on. Now, this is a team that I had 4th in this division last year, but when we're talking about this team, they had 2 first-round picks last year, and they go out and they pick up 2 elite players in their positions in Devin Witherspoon and Jackson Smith-Njigba on each side of the ball. So now at the cornerback position, they have Tariq Woolen, they have Devin Witherspoon, they have Trey Brown, they also have Quandre Diggs and Jamal Adams in the deep part of the defensive backfield. They have Bobby Wagner at the middle linebacker position again. They have depth on the defensive line. And then their offense, I think, is going to be absolutely nuclear. I think it's going to be phenomenal. I'm in on Geno Smith this year. I don't think he's going to have like an MVP type year, but let's just talk about some people around him. He's got Kenneth Walker, who showed to be an absolute game changer at the running back position last year. They go out and they draft Zach Charbonnet in the 2nd round, a very, very capable backup who could be a 50-50 split by the end of the season. He's been a good guy in fantasy circles. And then you talk about the wide receivers. They have DK Metcalf, Tyler Lockett, and then they go out in the 1st round and they sign they draft Jackson Smith-Njigba, the number 1 wide receiver in the class from last season. Like, you're talking about studs on the outside, all providing different skill sets, and their offensive line is great. They go out last year and they sign they draft Charles Cross and Lucas Abraham to be their tackles. Both of them performed absolutely great last year and only are going to get better in their 2nd year. As long as Geno Smith continues to distribute the ball, doesn't turn the ball over, I think they're honestly going to win the division. I just do. I think the Niners are going to have a tougher schedule. The Seahawks, while they were still good last year and they were competing for that playoff slot, it's like their schedule's not going to be ridiculous. And I just think they're going to be hungry. I think there's some drama in San Francisco right now. I'm really not sold on Brock Purdy. Like, everyone loves Brock Purdy, but I'm like, listen, I need to see more. He came out of nowhere. Nobody had film on him, and he had a great run. And then, his body couldn't hold up in the playoffs. So I need to see a full season out of Brock Purdy. I mean, they traded Trey Lance, the player they took number 3 overall, and they traded 3 first-round picks for because they believe in Brock Purdy and I guess Sam Darnold. So I need to see what their quarterback position can have. Obviously, with San Francisco, you have arguably the best player in the NFL in Trent Williams at the left tackle position. You have Christian McCaffrey, probably the best running back in the league. You have Brandon Ayuk and Deebo Samuel, 2 of the best wide receivers in the league. You have George Kittle, when healthy, one of the best tight ends in the league. And then defensive side of the ball, you have Nick Bosa, re-signed on a new contract, who was the defensive player of the year last year. You got Fred Warner. You got all these guys on the defensive side of the ball that make up one of the best units in the league. The Niners should win this division. 100%. They should win this division and potentially represent the NFC in the Super Bowl. I think the Seahawks are going to be a very, very good team. Pete Carroll is a phenomenal coach, especially on the defensive side of the ball. And then they just have given Geno every single opportunity to succeed. So I have the Seahawks at number 1, and I have the Niners at number 2. Let's go to the NFC South, and this one is a little bit more cut and dry, I believe. I think the New Orleans Saints are easily the best team in this division. Every other team in this division is kind of going through a transition, whether it be a new coach, whether it be a new quarterback. This is the only team that I believe has a lot of continuity. Obviously, Derek Carr is a new addition, new quarterback with the team, but he is a veteran. He's been in the league for almost 10 years now, it feels like. And, they have veterans all over the offense. Michael Thomas should be healthy. Alvin Kamara is going to be serving a 3-game suspension, but he should be coming back healthy. when his suspension is up. They signed Jamal Williams to add to the backfield. Kendre Miller in the backfield as well. They went out and drafted. And then on the outside, like I mentioned, Michael Thomas, Chris Olave, everybody is very, very excited about, including myself. Their offensive line is good. Their defense is very, very good. Just a number of great players on the defensive line, led by Cam Jordan. And I just think they just have too much talent to lose this division. Barring an injury to Derek Carr, this team will represent the NFC South in the playoffs this year. And then throughout the rest of the South, I have the Falcons at number 2, the Panthers at number 3, and the Buccaneers at number 4. I'm really excited to see what the Falcons do this year. Arthur Smith is traditionally a ground and pound guy, and they go out and they draft Bijan Robinson, one of the best prospects at the running back position we've seen in a few years, to be their lead back. They have a good offensive line. They run the ball more than anybody in the league. We'll see what they have in Desmond Ridder at the quarterback position. But they've spent a first-round pick over the last 3 years on a skill position players, whether it be Drake London Drake London 2 years ago, Kyle Pitts a couple years ago, and then Bijan Robinson this last year. I hope they utilize those guys like to an extreme amount. Like, I hope they hyper-target Kyle Pitts, hyper-target Drake London, because you just spent top 10 picks on these guys, top 15 picks on these guys. Sorry if I think you should use them more often than you do. Bijan is obviously going to steal the show offensively, and then their defense, they made some big signings like Jesse Bates. They signed at safety, but you're just looking at a team that is spending their big money in the wrong places. So, but they did make some big signings. Like, those players are good. They earned that money for a reason. So I think they'll still be solid. I see like a 6-11 season coming for them. 7-10 season maybe if all goes well. Panthers, I'm excited to watch Bryce Young play with Frank Reich. I think it's going to be a fun team, but I don't really think they're going to get a lot of wins. And then the Buccaneers, I think, could overperform. Baker Mayfield obviously has been on good teams in the past. Mike Evans and Chris Godwin out wide with Rachaad White in their backfield. They could outperform expectations, but their defense, I think, is just atrocious, and their offensive line struggled. Ryan Jansen, their center, I believe, is going to be out all season this year. So we'll see what happens there, but I don't really expect too much out of the Buccaneers. All right, time for the NFC East, and I don't think it's really a surprise to any that I have the Philadelphia Eagles winning this division. I have the Philadelphia Eagles representing the NFC in the Super Bowl this season. Now, a lot of people, A, might call me a homer. That's fine. B, might say, listen, they lost the Super Bowl last year. Rarely does a team get back to the Super Bowl after they lose. And to that, I say that's fair. It's a great point. It's a phenomenal point. However, at the end of the day, this team is so internally motivated that I don't think they really give a rip. I don't think they really care that they lost in the Super Bowl. Now, don't hear what I'm not saying. Obviously, they care that they lost in the Super Bowl. Every player this offseason has put the blame on themselves, which is phenomenal when you look at the leadership of this team. Jalen Hurts, A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith, Lane Johnson, Brandon Graham, Fletcher Cox, all of them say it's their fault. They blame themselves for that game. And they've buried it. And I think they said, listen, we're not, so what? We made the Super Bowl last year. Who cares? Everybody's 0-0. They're not, Nick Sirianni said it best. They're not just going to lay down because we're the Eagles. You know what I mean? We're not just going to, other teams aren't going to come into the link and lay down. They're going to give you their best shot. Since you're the Super Bowl representative from the NFC last year, that is every team's Super Bowl when you go to their stadium. They're going to know you represented the conference last year, and honestly could have won the Super Bowl last year. We're one of the best teams in the league. So they're going to get everybody's best shot. I don't think they win 14 games this year. I think it settles into more like the 12. I think their over-under is 11.5. I think they go 12-5 to the point where maybe they don't get the 1 seed, but the lack of great teams in the NFC makes me think that even with a record like 12-5, they could get the 1 seed. If they go 13-4, they should lock up the 1 seed easily, but they do have some tough games this year. I don't think they'll blow teams out like they did last year. Honestly, 12-5, 11-6, 10-7 would be pretty much like the worst case, honestly, for the Eagles. But this team, like I just said, with Jalen Hurts at the quarterback position, they're going to reach their potential. I've said that about a couple other teams, but Jalen Hurts is just an absolute monster. I didn't want to go all in on the Eagles last year for fears of sounding like a homer or doing anything like that, but I did have them winning the division, making the playoffs, and honestly, you just look at the NFC, like when we're talking about some of these teams, like the Seahawks, I have winning the West, and the Niners, like, the Seahawks are good, but that would be a great game with the Eagles. But if they have to come to the link, I'll favor the Eagles. If the Niners come to the link, I'm sorry, I'm favoring the Eagles. But those are the two probably toughest teams. Maybe the Lions, but then you're starting to talk about inexperienced teams like the Lions. You're talking about the Cowboys, who could potentially be interesting there. I have them finishing at number 2 in the NFC East, making the playoffs as well. I'll just round out the East real quick. I have the Commanders at number 3 and the Giants at number 4. I'm higher on the Commanders than most. I almost put the Commanders at number 2 in my NFC East, but I felt like that was extremely disrespectful to the Cowboys the more I thought about it. But that just shows more of my excitement for the Commanders with their offense. Eric Bieniemy, now their offensive coordinator. They figured out their whole ownership situation, so I think that black cloud has now left their organization. And I think they're going to outperform. I think the Giants outperformed last season, so I think they could come back to earth a little bit. I could see them being 7-10, 8-9 in this season. I could see the Commanders being 9-8. I think that's a primetime spot for them this year. Cowboys right in front of them, and then Eagles obviously number 1. So I was talking a little bit about the conference in general. I have the Eagles, the Seahawks, the Lions, and the Saints winning their division, and then I have the Cowboys, 49ers, and Packers making the playoff as wild card teams. The only other teams I can see really contending for the wild card are the Vikings and the Commanders, and I guess the Giants too. But the Falcons, Panthers, Buccaneers, Rams, and Cardinals, I just don't see competitive. I don't see them fighting for playoff spots. So I think that it's going to be, a top-heavy conference. I have the Eagles coming out of the NFC representing the NFC. I think it's going to be very, very interesting. I think the Packers and Lions could switch. I think the Saints are probably one and done in the playoffs, although they have talent. I think the Cowboys, we'll see what they do this year. They got rid of offensive coordinator Kellen Moore, which I think was a mistake. Their offense is going to be much less potent. They still have one of the best defensives in the league. There's no doubt about that, which is going to be important for them because they're going to need the defense to carry them. With Dak Prescott at quarterback, I'm just not sold on. I think he's Kirk Cousins. I think he's just a good game manager. He's fine. He's great off the field in the locker room, but, I'm not sure they're going to hand the ball over completely to Tony Pollard in the backfield. They get rid of Ezekiel Elliott. They go out and they trade for Brandon Cooks, so they're going to pair him with CeeDee Lamb on the outside. They also, got Stephon Gilmore to help Trevon Diggs on the back end of their defense. So their defense is great. They went out and they signed a guy on the outside on the offense. Their offensive line has continued to be good. It just comes down to what can Dak Prescott do for that team. Up until this point, we really haven't seen much. So my official Super Bowl prediction, I've already told you who is representing each conference. I have the Eagles and the Bengals playing in the big game, and I have the Eagles lifting the Lombardi Trophy this year. I'm sorry, call me a homer, do what you want, but in my opinion, I just think they're the best roster top to bottom. They do have some defensive turnover. They do have coordinator turnover. But at the same time, their offense is so explosive, and they have such a veteran group on the defensive line, on the defense side of the ball, along with extreme depth on the defensive line. They just have the best roster to me. They have continuity in the coaching staff with Nick Sirianni, with Jeff Stoutland as their run game coordinator. Brian Johnson got promoted, so it's not like it's a new guy coming in learning a new system. He's going to continue running the system that led them to the Super Bowl last year. I think Jalen Hurts could win MVP this year if he stays healthy. Devontae Smith, A.J. Brown are both going to fly over 1,000 yards. I think Dallas Goedert could go over 1,000 yards. The only thing that could alter this prediction is injury for me. Performance-wise, I don't see them really taking a step back. However, they did have all 22 starters from Week 1 play in the Super Bowl last year. Lane Johnson's a guy who's dealt with injuries in the past. Landon Dickerson was in and out of the lineup last year. Jordan Mailata had some concussion issues last year. Jason Kelce is just an Iron Man and usually plays through injuries, but he is getting up there, plays the offensive line. Jalen Hurts obviously injured his shoulder last year. A.J. Brown has missed time during the course of his career. On the defensive side of the ball, obviously Brandon Graham tore his Achilles a couple years ago. Darius Slay constantly picks up knocks here and there. Fletcher Cox getting older too. So the fact that, they have an older team, there definitely could be some injuries. However, I think that's the only way they don't make it really, really far in the playoffs. So if they don't make it there and it's not on injuries, I can't have a worse prediction than I had last year with the Broncos and Rams. So I think that is the team. The Bengals, I think, go into Arrowhead for the AFC Championship, and they beat the Chiefs this year. I made this mistake last year by betting against the Chiefs, and I said last year that I wasn't going to do it, but I didn't want to pick the Eagles and Chiefs again, and I think the Eagles just have a much easier road to the Super Bowl in the NFC. So I think Joe Burrow and the Bengals are going to get it done this year and get to the championship. And the last two Super Bowl losers, I think, will face off this year. So honestly, I could see that game going either way. That's like a coin flip for me. But I think the Eagles will end up hoisting the Lombardi Trophy this year and win it all. So that is going to wrap up our divisional and our Super Bowl predictions and all that stuff. I'd love to hear from you guys, your predictions, your everything, what you think of my predictions, and all that stuff. I think it's going to be very, very fun. It's going to be a very, very fun year. Obviously, the AFC is absolutely loaded. The quarterbacks in the AFC are just absolutely ridiculous. The teams are absolutely ridiculous. The NFC is going through a lot of changes, so it's going to be really, really fun to see, where those teams go, and what happens there. Some guys coming back from injury that missed the end of the year. It's going to be fun to watch, and overall, I think we're all just excited that football is back. We got opening night tonight, opening weekend this week, and it's going to be a lot of fun. So just a channel update, I guess, if you want to call it that. Just what you can expect from the channel as the football season goes on. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to have an episode every week. Obviously, we're going to be talking about the Eagles game, specifically how it goes. We're going to be talking about the NFL in general, some big storylines that we're going to be talking about. Also, if you guys didn't know, I do have a Substack, which is a written part of the podcast that I'm going to be doing. It's not, transcripts of the pod. It's my own independent work of writing. I'm trying to get into that a little bit more as, I've been enjoying writing and stuff, so I'm trying to get into that a little bit more. So you're going to be expecting at least one Substack a week, one Substack post a week, and at least one podcast a week. It's going to be at least one fantasy Substack post every week. We're going to post reactions to some big maybe injuries, some guys who have big performances, and we're going to talk about almost like a little notebook of just fantasy football week to week. So for all the fantasy fans, definitely subscribe to the Substack so you can see that writing. We can engage and we can talk about fantasy sports that way. If there's any big stories that happen that I want to write about and stuff, I'll make a post on there, but those will be a little more infrequent. You'll definitely get the fantasy football notebook, though, every week. When it comes to the podcast and the audio version, you're going to get an Eagles reaction every single week. Obviously, as the baseball season winds down, too, we're going to be talking about the Phillies more and more. I also want to talk a little bit about English Premier League. I'm starting to get into that a lot more with my team, Chelsea. So we're going to be talking about that a little bit as well here and there. But as we get into football season, that is going to dominate a lot of the content coming out of this off of this channel as we move forward. So definitely, you can look forward to an episode early in the week, almost every week, recapping the Eagles. Hopefully wins and some big storylines around the NFL. And then you can also expect that fantasy football notebook to hit the Substack. So definitely hit that subscribe button. Also engage. I'm ready to go for questions. If you guys have questions, send them my way. Comment on the YouTube channel. I'm always engaging in there. I've gotten a few comments on some of my videos. I'm always ready to engage and get back on there. So I want to hear from you guys. So I want to hear what everybody wants to hear about and all that stuff, answering questions and the like. And yeah, just subscribe, give us that 5-star review. That's something that really, really helps the channel grow. This is literally just an independent thing that I do, so any free way you can support this. I don't ask for money or anything like a lot of people do. So if you can just support this that way, give us that 5-star review, give us that subscription, that's really all we can ask for us to keep going on this path. So that is going to kind of wrap it up now that we have kind of finished up that update, finished up our predictions, our mega NFL prediction episode. So like I just mentioned, please give us that subscribe, that 5-star review, Apple Podcast, Spotify, YouTube, anywhere you get your podcasts. Definitely give us some love there. Again, feel free to shoot us any questions. We'll answer them live on the air. And thank you guys for tuning in, and we'll look forward to seeing you back here again next time.